lovely background for Keith and Chrissy though.
Are we on?
We're live!
We're live!
Hello! Hello, and we have nobody yet, but in case you are going to catch up with this later, which I'm hoping that you will, we are Moirai, and we are joined here this evening with Chloë Mason,
Hello.
fresh from Sydney, Sydney, Australia. So yeah, Mel Biggs, Freya, Sarah Matthews, and we are fresh from our album launch on Saturday. Wasn't it great? I'm still getting over it, I think.
Absolutely.
Anybody like a
Emotional.
Yes.
An emotional experience for audience and artist alike, I think.
Yeah. And it was a full house, so it had that whole energy of expectation and enthusiasm.
Yeah. Like people just kind of kept appearing and cramming in at the back. And John Tams emceed for us. He was desperate to see the show, and he offered to MC, which was an honour for us.
Absolutely.
And he opened with a bit of a rant about Derby Council.
Quite rightly so.
And I felt it set the scene, even though it was a bit of a soapbox for him. But I liked the fact that it got people a bit like, oh yes, and then we went on and kind of took that energy with us on stage. Yeah, so we're here live, and we would like you to participate in this live conversation. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask about Framed, the Alice Wheeldon story, our new album, or if you came to the album launch on Saturday, or any of our work so far, but specifically this story, if you can, because we've got Chloë here, so we've got somebody that knows a lot of stuff. And yeah, so we'll kick off. I've written some questions down to start us off. What did you think of Saturday? Like you came to a rehearsal, and we sort of previewed some things for you. But what was it like to actually be there and see the full thing?
Well, it was surreal. It was really strange and very. It's because I had the confidence of seeing your rehearsal before that I felt entirely safe, and also because you'd been so careful to check stuff and to get the right tone. I felt very comfortable, and so I could sit there next to Nick Hiley, the historian of the story right from the inception, to enjoy it and to listen to it. I took no photos because I was so absorbed.
Oh wow, lovely. Did he feel safe in our hands as well? Did he feel like we had the story safe and sound?
And I think that he also understands, as I do, that the incredible value of not only having a story which is told by academic historians and legally and correctly and formally, but also a cultural expression that can take the story on and more widely and to different generations.
And the folk genre works so well for that sense of storytelling, doesn't it? And true storytelling as well as made up.
And I also think that the photographs that you had behind, were really added a whole other dimension to it, because it helped people situate the story in the historical period in which it was told, but also the contemporary relevance, which matters so much.
Yeah.
Well done, Mel, and well done, Mel's father, Peter Biggs, for running all that for us.
I've always felt from quite early on that there was so much to tell, and we weren't able to do all of the story within the context of the lyrics, even though we've done a fair amount of it, I have to say. But there's so much research that story, and through Chloe's sharing, we've got lots of images that I thought, when we first saw them, we kind of had this emotional response to them. So it was important that we share that with the audience, who in a snapshot of an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes, are going on a journey that we've spent a whole year doing. So we felt quite keen to try and get that emotional response, as quickly as we could and as powerfully as we could, because we've warmed up with it over a year, and have had lots of highs and lows with the story. I think it's always one of those things, I think, when you're crafting a show, is the journey that the audience go on, because that's sometimes something you lose sight of when you're in the trying to design a show.
The thing is, you can't know it, can you, from the inception, the idea, through to creation, through to recording, through to the development of the piece. And we went through several stages of getting feedback from people in various different ways, musically at the preview down in Broadstairs, and then the dress rehearsal. But you just cannot be in the audience's shoes in those seats and perceive it the way they do. So it's a really difficult thing, and I feel very lucky that we've had the feedback opportunities that we've had so far to kind of hone it as much as we could, but obviously we're still receiving feedback now, and we're still improving it. So yeah.
Yes, because you never know when an audience is going to laugh or cry or react to something until you actually put it in front of them. Doesn't matter how many times you do it on your own or rehearse it, because people are all different. And actually, even within that, some of those things won't remain the same. You'll get a surprise reaction from somewhere else, and that'll make us think, oh, okay, that's interesting.
But all of that being said, I was absolutely delighted with the way it went and the impact it seemed to have, because it was a very, very powerful experience. I'd go so far as to say one of the most powerful musical and cultural experiences of my performing life, and that's a big thing to say for me.
That's quite incredible, because I felt the same, and I'm the baby of the band, so I haven't got as much performing experience, but I definitely felt like it was you are but I think, is it okay to say, I mean, I certainly welled up pretty massively at one point, to the point where I thought, am I going to hold it together through this tune? I noticed Joe got emotional, and I noticed you got, I can't remember exactly where
I was singing, I can't remember whether it was Hetty's letter to Auntie Liz, but I made the big mistake of looking at Chloe's face while I was singing it, and I thought, no, I can't do that, don't look at Chloe right now. Bring it back to the music, let's be professional here. But I mean, how to keep that emotional content.
You see the lovely Sarah?
I think I'm just hiding behind that screen. You're all right.
She is there.
Because the camera can still see me.
Oh, can it? Oh, right.
Yeah, the fact that, you want it to have that emotional content, but you do not want to lose control. It's such a really interesting balance. And I find that, because you don't want to lose that emotional connection. It's because putting the emotion into the piece of music and the song is the connection with the audience, and that's why it touched so many people on that day, I think. But keeping the control of your vocals, and and you're trying to make sure that things come out as clearly as you want them to.
It also depends, some of it depends where you are individually at the time. I mean, me being a deeply miserable person generally, it's always going to be kind of borderline. But no, I mean, seriously, actually, it's the human voice that gets to me. So for those of you who weren't there, we handed out a sheet that had choruses to songs on it, which meant people were joining in. One of which was a very sad song, and it was just that kind of very gentle way that the audience were singing it back, that nearly, I mean, it very, very nearly made me go. I could hear the emotion in my own voice, just because it's such a beautiful thing when people sing together.
They were very keen to do that immediately. They obviously had the lyrics there, but
I know, but they've never heard the song before,
I know,
and they're going like, I want to sing, I'm ready, I've got my words, how does it go? It's just amazing. And they would just jump right in, first chorus of each song. I just couldn't believe that.
And I just was overcome by hearing other people sing, and Nick and then I heard Nick join in.
I saw him singing.
Yes. And these are sort of non-folk audience regulars that might not, feel so comfortable as others would.
I think what was also needs to be said here is that it's an incredibly complex story in itself, partly because the spies actually, deliberately are concealing who they are, masquerading as other people, and so it's quite complex, and yet you manage to tell the whole story but also get the emotional tone, and most importantly towards the end of actually turning it back into a story of commitment and struggle and hope and great joy of life. And that was so important, to not have a tragedy end tragically so people mope. So that's not what was ever intended. And Alice always knew and spoke about one day the truth will out. And so, people like Nick and yourselves are helping to get it out there. So that's terrific.
Right.
So I can see that we have 4 people watching us, apparently. Please ask us a question in the chat window. Just write, you can type in a message to us, and if there's anything that we're talking about that you want to know more about, or if you saw the show on Saturday or any of the previews, just ask away. Up until then, we're just going to natter on. So,
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when did you first become aware of Alice's story yourself?
Well, the conviction of Alice and my grandparents, I only knew in the late 80s when our father was dying, basically. And he was determined, I think, to make sure that he didn't die without us knowing what had happened. Yeah.
That's so amazing, because he'd spent quite a lot of his life not wanting to talk about it and not feeling able to talk about it. Is that correct?
Well, we don't really know, of course, because basically Deirdre, my elder sister, and myself grew up not knowing what
So, and
happened.
he'd made that decision that was then the right time for him to tell you.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah.
But we knew, the weird thing was that we knew that our grandmother, Winnie Mason, had been arrested and sent to prison. And we'd always assumed, because we knew that Winnie and Hetty were keen on women's emancipation and workers' rights and a whole lot of anti-vivisection, all those sorts of things. And so we just assumed quite proudly that Winnie had gone to prison as a suffragette, and that suited us fine in terms of our own commitment to women's liberation and human rights.
Equality,
That's something I wanted to talk to you about, actually. Was I think one of the most incredible things when we started to get to know you was realizing your own activism, if you don't mind me using that word, but your own kind of standing up for women's rights and things. And I couldn't kind of get away from this idea that there was some hereditary process that you had no awareness of until, you know, that particular period in your life. Were you as surprised by that as we were, or was that just? Well,
a lot of people in Australia, where we live, basically. My sister is because there people were very interested in the story too, of course, because it's such an amazing piece of history and personal story. And we gave a talk to the the Jessie Street National Women's Library, and we've also been on ABC Radio. And so a lot of people laughed and thought that, well, they thought it was incredibly humorous that here we were, well known as campaigners for women's rights and also other types of human rights and anti-war activism. And Peter Mason, my dad, was extremely well known for being opposed to the Vietnam War conscription, which we had in Australia during the Vietnam War, and also opposed to nuclear weapons. So we had had form, as it were. And then, so people made lots of jokes about it being genetic, but it's a big joke, of course, because it's about the way you see the world, nothing to do with
it.
It
Reminds me of many years ago.
Yes,
It reminds me many years ago, being at Greenham Common myself, wandering around the perimeter fence and bumping into my mum.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? And she had her face painted with a peace symbol. That's what I remember. Yeah,
I would remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really interesting though, because even though your father hadn't given you the backstory earlier in your life, he'd obviously raised you with the ability to think and question things and strive for what you believed in, and so it's really, this nature nurture thing is very interesting.
Well, I should also mention my mum though too, because she was during the Vietnam War, she was involved in a women's organisation called Save Our Sons, which was opposition mothers opposed to conscription, to actually draw attention to the madness of the Vietnam War, basically. And again, like the First World War, the rules about free speech and freedom of and opposition to war was greatly curtailed, and it was actually a criminal offence. So she took a stand in that way. So
should we re-clarify for anybody that's just trying to use Joe Freya? And we've just released our new album, which you can see just here, Framed, the Alice Wheeldon Story, which is a true story about a local Derby woman of 100 years ago who was framed for having had a plot to murder Lloyd George, and it wasn't true. And we have her great granddaughter with us. This is Chloë Mason. We're very honoured to have her chatting about the whole story and the album launch that we gave on Saturday and how it all went. She was present for, which was lovely. So if you've just joined us, that's to fill you in. Where to next?
I'm just trying to get people online to chat to us.
Jo's just finishing her peanuts, so
Yeah.
she'll be with you in a moment. Anybody like a strawberry? Anybody like a strawberry?
Or maybe it'd be appropriate to mention the Snail Walk.
Oh yes, let's do that.
Yeah, so we've got this brilliant leaflet here, which is available will be available from Derby Tourist Information.
It's very detailed. Look at this.
Chloe has been prepare it, and we had something that was just a piece of A4 paper that was double-sided with information on to walk around, and now this is like a huge piece of A3 with so much extra information on, and a map as well, so that you can find your way around Derby and the Normanton area, which is where most of this story took place. And it's fascinating. I mean, to go with other people is really interesting as well, and if you can then it's
one of the prizes on our Kickstarter
absolutely
campaign, isn't it? To actually spend a day, I think it's April the 2nd.
April the 1st.
April the 1st.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
And it's not a joke, it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. It's in my diary and everything.
Yeah, so we have a Kickstarter running which ends next week, and we're very close to making our target, so you could be maybe the last person to kind of help us over the line, so to speak. There's other rewards there as well.
But
there's
we'll be walking this walk and talking all about this project. We'll be with the People's History Group, probably there,
and finishing in a rooms for a nice
afternoon.
We have tea and cake.
Yeah, definitely. There'll be tea and cake.
And you can get to the Kickstarter link just beneath this video in the description, or just go to Kickstarter and type in Moirai framed the Aris Wheeldon story, and it will appear. So yeah.
So historically, obviously, I feel we came to this late, in that we were astounded we didn't
know about
this woman. Sarah lives in Derby, Mel's not far away. I'm over in Nottinghamshire, across the border.
You have many Derby contacts, though,
I
don't
do
you? And have had for years.
So I was very surprised. And then it became more apparent that other things have been done artistically, like Rob Johnson's song, and also
Jeff Dayton, who kind of pointed me towards the story in the first place, but I needed another reminder to come back to it. So yeah, we found it by a convoluted route, didn't we? Yeah.
But there are quite a few other things as well.
Yeah, there's a number of plays that have been performed in Derby and in other places. Sheila Rowbotham's play was performed in Rotherham, and she wrote a book about called Friends of Alice Wheeldon.
It's a very good read, actually. We've all read that.
And so, in addition to that, there's poetry, a painting by Emily Johns, and so and she's mentioned now in a number of books, and there's several plays. And now Derby itself, the city of Derby, have acknowledged the significant contribution that Alice Wheeldon made by a plaque on her house, which you'll see on the wall.
Yeah.
And there's also a star on the pavement as one of the stars of fame. So things are really happen.
And the room as well.
And yes, thank you for the reminder. Yes.
So
at the council,
in the council house, the one of the big public meeting rooms is actually named after her, with photographs of Alice there.
What do you think Alice would have thought about all that?
Well, I think that she would have known that the truth needed to come out. But one of the good things about the new walk brochure, is it's not only about Alice, because she was part of a wider community in Derby, and who were very loyal to each other and supportive. So there was quite a strong anti-war movement in Derby with conscientious objectors. And so there's various sites include other people's houses where conscientious objectors lived. So I think that's really, Alice wouldn't want it to be all about her.
No, I get that impression.
She's that sort of person, and she would also be saying, well, what's happening now? So she wouldn't want to, she wouldn't let you rest on the laurels either. So, yes.
As it says in the final song, stand up and
there's lots to be done, you see. I mean, because also her children were involved in a number of very different campaigns. And I was just, while I was coming here today, one of the questions were, which is most important, the Brexit debate or climate change? And I said, well, why prioritise those? And similarly, then they were debating, there were two of her children, Will and Hetty, were very involved in the mixed bathing campaign to allow men and women to bathe in the same pool, and hunting and anti-vivisection. So, there's not a matter of the one thing, it's actually your values and the way you see how to make the world a better place for more people.
I think
On a micro and a macro scale.
Yeah,
Actually.
exactly.
That's one of the things that I blogged about personally, was the fact that I kind of found a voice in myself. Not that I'm making massive of it, but I'm getting used to having one. And it's really through knowing Alice and researching her and kind of having her voice in my head, or my voice as I interpret it to be. But I find, as a young person, and maybe people of other generations are as well at the moment, I get overwhelmed. There seems to be so many things you can stand up and talk about and fight for, and that, to me, they seem to be massive. I think in this country, climate and Brexit is probably two of the biggest ones. Fight for the NHS, probably the third in line there. But it's worrying times, and I think I went to a Peggy Seeger concert. It was a discussion. She was in interview, and one of the things I kind of throwaway comment was, choose what you're going to fight for and put your energy into that, because there's lots of things out there that you can get distracted by or get overwhelmed by and bury your head in the sand. But actually, if you just kind of choose one thing and then go and do something towards that, and then maybe you can choose something else later down the line. But
I think Alice would be happy with that approach, because you're throwing your energies into doing something good about something.
And there are surprising connections often, aren't there, between the micro and the macro levels of things. I view it a bit like a desk that's overloaded with stuff. You've got to start somewhere. If you just look at the desk, you walk out of the room and go and do something else. But if you pick one thing up, and maybe prioritize a little bit, it starts to become manageable, and then you can actually focus on something.
You can do more with it.
Has someone come in with a question?
They have. My mum is online, and she has found the chat window. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 5 of you now. If you look to the right of this window, there is somewhere that says "say something," and you can type as a question. So mum wants to know, how is the campaign to quash the convictions going?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, which we haven't mentioned. Well, that's it's going well. It's been a lot of work, and we've now got to the stage of a final draft of the application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission.
Huge amount of work. Well done.
Now with the barristers, so for their final review. So we're hoping very much to lodge it soon.
How many years has it taken you to get this document? And when you say document, I'm guessing it's more like a weighty tome.
Weighty tome, yeah.
Right. It's not so much length. It's a matter of the strength of the material to show there's new evidence that warrants a review of the case and a review of the convictions. So this is and the arguments that support that, and the documentation that goes with that. So it's necessary to present the Commission with the actual primary sources, the material, which includes the reports by the undercover agents. So that's all presented, ready to go.
And this is something that I guess that wasn't done at the time of Alice and her trial. It was because of the way that it was twisted round, evidence was withheld and embargoed and kind of buried for 100 years. And you've discovered this now. The embargoes have been lifted. Nicholas and Chloë and papers. And this is it. You found this, and now it's ready to be represented.
Well, the material. Nicholas Harley was the person who really started to draw the material together, and he as a historian, he had access to archives and understood how to use them, which was invaluable. But then, after our father died, we found material in his trunk, which has also helped put some of the pieces together, including some of the original writings of the undercover agent who was not produced at trial. And the family argued at the time, in 1917, in the Old Bailey, that they wanted him produced. And the difficulty was that he was using an alias, a false name, so they didn't know who he really was, and they didn't know where he really lived. And there was huge amounts of effort by socialist groups, women's groups, people like Sylvia Pankhurst, trade unions in Leicester, who tried to find him. So there was a lot of effort. But then the government sent him to South Africa, so to keep him out of the way. And the government archives were then embargoed, and for a long period, sometimes to 1980, sometimes to the year 2000, and some material still is not available. So it's been a very challenging time to find it all. But I guess the first few years, Deirdre and myself, even in 2012, we were overcome by the interest of the Derby People's History Group, who began the campaign to clear their names. And I mean, we're just coming to terms with that emotionally, rather than, you know, thinking, oh yes, well, where's the legal avenue here? And it took us a while to get to grips with the availability in Britain of it. So
That's great. I hope we've helped in some way, some small way. I hope we've helped to bolster you on that journey and keep you going.
Yeah, and it's also good that more people understand and know about it and realise that there's an opportunity for redress and to revisit what's been happening. And I'm very pleased here, since I've been staying here, the way that some of the legal decisions that are being made that are very important historically and long term are actually getting such wide coverage in the media, so people can appreciate the value of having the rule of law, and you know, that's the basis. So we're not just a rabbly mass of a society. And we didn't get there easily. So those are things that we need to actually value, because in Derbyshire, I mean, this is where the Derbyshire Rising in 1817 occurred. So, I mean, we've got a long tradition of arguing for fairness and proper treatment of the people. So we should respect. It took hundreds of years to get where we have. So don't throw it away.
Absolutely.
Well, fingers crossed for it all. I'm sure you'll keep us updated with how the barristers come back and obviously then when it's finally submitted. But
that's
it's exciting.
Yes, it's really exciting, and I'll certainly let you know.
Yeah,
and it'll also be on the website. The Alice Wheeldon is a sharp person that's got a website, of course.
Yeah, alicewheeldon.org, and that's where Deirdre and Jenny, Deirdre's partner, have kind of collated a lot of information. So if you're interested in finding out more about this story, there's a lot of false facts out there because it's been widely publicised over the years, like over the century that it's been a story and been in existence. But alicewheeldon.org is where you can find the real kind of nitty-gritties and the truth, if you like. And also this, because we've tried to be as factual and as faithful as possible. So if you have a listen to the music, it's written into the lyrics of the songs and in the sleeve notes and everything as well. So another question from Mum. Nobody else seems to be able to find the questions, or maybe you're just enjoying listening. But if you do have any questions for us, please let us know in the comments section, just to the right-hand side of this screen. If you're on a phone, I have to say I'm not sure where it is, but it'll be somewhere on the YouTube screen. If you scroll down, there'll be a say something kind of conversation starter. So do let us know what you want to know.
Yolanda's come back also with a thank heavens that your father kept a hold of all of that stuff in his trunk and that you were able to find that, and it kind of, you know, continue to fill out your case and validate things.
That is very important.
Mum's saying, where will the next performance of Frame the Alice Wheeldon story be?
Well, I don't think we can technically say where, because they're building up over next year. So which one will actually pop in first is anybody's guess at this moment. I mean, there are things in the diary. I'd be to say that will be the next performance, because I anticipate that there will be others. So I would suggest you keep your eye on Moirai Trio. Is it .co.uk?
It is, yeah.
And indeed hairmusic.agency on the Moirai page there. All the dates go up on there as well. So
definitely got 2 confirmed for May, haven't we? But as before then, but we'll be at Chippenham Folk Festival.
Yes, in terms of festivals,
taking part in Belper Arts Festival as well with this show. So
yeah, and we've got some other irons in the fire for other local to Derby gigs, which is quite exciting, with it being a local Derby story. I'm interested to take it further afield to see if there is anybody that knows about it. We did a preview in Broadstairs, and we had a cousin, I think, of yours, who was there at the festival anyway, and she came along.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And that was quite exciting. But I mean, I think, how many sisters and brothers did Alice have? When we look at the family tree, there seems to be this whole row, and Alice is in the middle of them. There's a big family behind Alice, isn't there? So there's a lot of cousins and once removed and all sorts of wonderful relatives out there, some of which were at the launch on Saturday in Derby as well, which is it's super exciting. We had a whole row reserved for family and VIPs.
It was beautiful. I'm mentioning no names, but you could see facial resemblance to the pictures that we've got of Alice. It was just absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
So how many brothers and sisters?
Alice.
Oh, we put Chloe on the spot there. That's a hard question.
I remember. I know.
Many.
She's definitely got. She had two Derby sisters, Elizabeth and Ellen. And Ellen had a conscientious objector son, also called William. And Elizabeth Gossage is Fiona's. That's her relative.
Right.
And then there's Charles. I think Charles was a bit older, but I have to look.
Yeah,
I have to look.
There's a lot of facts to keep hold of,
that's right.
which is why Chloe has got a very well organised Dropbox folder and hard drive with all of this information on. I've got a question here, which I think it would be quite nice to discuss. What do you remember of your childhood with your grandparents, Winnie and Alf, and just because it appears in our story?
Well, I remember our family lived in Winnie's house in Welwyn Garden City. That's where I grew up as a child, actually, and I remember her very clearly, and her Siamese cat. They called Simon.
Simon
the Siamese cat.
Love it.
And she had a fantastic garden because she was a big gardener. She had a marble Buddha in the garden, and I'll always remember the hedgehogs that came. And she was a very significant person. And she died. She was a chain smoker, and be careful. She died of lung cancer. Don't smoke.
Oh, right.
And and my sister, though, my elder sister, had very strong memories of her, and actually still had, and I still have a copy of it, is that Winnie was very keen on nature, because all of them were keen on nature, as our family were keen on nature too. And pressed flower books. And Winnie took Deirdre on, so made her do pressed flower things. So there's always conservation work to do, so there's all that sort of thing. So we knew Winnie more, and throughout my growing up, after Winnie died, because Winnie died young of lung cancer when I was only a little girl, really. But throughout my life, my parents often referred to me being like Winnie, which wasn't actually necessarily very flattering, because that was a stubborn person. And Alf, he was a pharmacist, and Deirdre and I remember very clearly visiting him in a pharmacy in Holborn. So that's very strong memories.
He continued as a pharmacist after the trial.
Yeah, he did. He was never, interestingly, he was never deregistered as a pharmacist.
That's very interesting, because the girls and Will couldn't find teaching.
They were teachers and they lost their jobs. They couldn't get work afterwards as teachers.
In fact, there's fantastic, wonderful documents about Hetty being refused, and there's documents refusing her to be registered as a teacher ever again.
And I think with Will, it was after the amnesty when COs were they pardoned, or they were released from prison.
They were released from prison, yes.
And he couldn't get a job as a teacher again because he'd been to prison, but he'd been to prison for something that he was, had been pardoned for. So that was a bit of a cycle that I couldn't really get my head around.
Unfair cycle that leaves you like unable to get the work. Your trade.
And it's also Nellie, when there were fantastic correspondence when they were in custody before the trial, and there's this absolutely stunning cache of letters which is held in the Metropolitan Police. And I guess one of my dreams would be for a good historian or person who knows how to edit letters of that kind and put context together, because they're absolutely superb. I mean, you use several letters, which is wonderful songs, but there's a whole lot more that are really powerful.
They were such articulate people, weren't they?
Yeah, and they told such great jokes in the letter.
Yeah,
witty.
And they quoted from poetry and and all that sort of stuff. It was gorgeous. They're gorgeous letters.
I think in a way it's quite cruel. I don't know how to put this, but we've been quite privileged to see some of these letters and family documents, because the family were watched by the police for about a month before they were arrested, and everything was sort of documented and copied, and then there were letters to and from custody, and everything again was copied. And because this was such a prestigious trial for the country and the government, everything was kind of kept very well documented, and that those documents now exist, and some of them have become available to us. In a way, it's been a wonderful creative gift to have that, but the reasons for it are clearly quite disturbing.
Yes.
But to sort of really get a good picture, not just from one or two, but for several letters, you can really start to understand who these people were, how they had a familial language going back and forth between them, and their little in-jokes, and you can really start to build that. And I think that provided, I think all of us kind of were able to hook into that and write about that and kind of create true characters on stage in this album right here.
And when we were taking words from the letters and turning them into lyrics, we were able to keep and retain those little phrases, you know, but joking seriously and all that kind of thing, those little expressions. And we kind of locked onto those, didn't we? And kept them in there because they are little treasures, really. And it's so lovely to have those people's, you know, from just ordinary people, their kind of perspective on things, that we might not otherwise be able to read that letter because it wouldn't have been kept. Maybe.
The thing about wanting to express personalities as part of the show, that was important for us, wasn't it? To build them up as people in their beliefs, and they're fighting for lots of different things, and
trying to make that quite rounded rather than trying to polish anybody.
Because often when you see or read stories or films or dramas, sometimes it can be frustrating when you think, actually, I don't know who that person is.
They couldn't really have been like that. It's two rose tinted glasses.
It's like they're a flat person. They've got no bottom. You know what I'm saying? But so it felt important. It felt like an important part of it to try and present them as rounded people, and not just a character in a particular part of
with one facet.
Story.
Well, in the one of the things that happens with the National Archive is that they periodically review the material that's in the archive to try and cull the amount of material. And all the Wheeldon material have got notes through it to say of historical importance, keep. And I do think that it's unusual to have a family of that class in that period, if you like, now so well documented. And because Nick and then more lately myself and other people like Sheila Robotham and Julian Potosky and all those other people too have put the material together, it is an extraordinary collection of a snapshot. And the fact that Hetty writes to her elder sister to ask her to oil the chains of the bicycle chains, because she understands that both her and her brother are now in prison and won't be able to look after their bicycles or their pussycats, or it's marvelous reading. So there's that everyday detail. There's the mix of the everyday life, but then there's a beautiful letter that Hetty writes to a mother of a conscientious objector, because the mother has written to Hetty to thank her for her work. So there's this wonderful correspondence. It's really, I think it's quite magic to read. And when I'm obviously biased, but nonetheless, I think it's a great read.
Absolutely.
And the condition of these letters is they're very fragile, Nick says. He's the only one who's seen them. I've been unable to see them. But I've got scans of some of them. So I think it would be wonderful to actually conserve them and then publish them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. That is one of your plans, isn't it? It's on the list.
It's on the table.
The full table.
So I'm going to consult my list of questions that I just dumped on a page. I'll
have more peanuts.
So there's something here. I seem to sort of focus quite a few questions about your dad and about how, was he able to explain how he was impacted upon by the story? Or through your eyes, can you see how his life was kind of changed in any way because of the secrecy and the kind of protective silence that was imposed on him and his family by Winnie and Alf, for obvious reasons? Just you couldn't talk about this story because you'd be kicked out of your lodgings and moved on. And
Well, both.
And they would stop speaking to you and things like that.
The life was turned upside down.
Well, both. Both amongst the papers that were in Peter's trunk were both letters from his father and his mother, separate letters, referring to this episode, how this episode had affected their lives, all of their lives, and to try and ask him for forgiveness for the damage that it had done to all of them. Because I think the persecution and the reputation went on and on and on. And I mean, one of the other papers that's in this collection, in my dad's collection, was a paper that was a newspaper published during the Second World War, where Alice is referred to as Lady Haw Haw. And a lot of people possibly don't know that reference, but Lord Haw Haw was the voice of an undermining the British efforts to defeat the held up on the one hand as this evil, super evil person, and that was as late as the 1940s. You see, so but by the same token, there was at the same time there was another article saying if this trial had not occurred in wartime, would they have really ever got convictions, or would it really have gone ahead? I mean, because
would anybody really have bothered to pursue it?
Because it's such a wacky claim, all this stuff about the use of the poison to murder Lloyd George. It's really so monstrous,
very convoluted,
considering who the people were, the fact that they were so anti-war, and
there was a quote somewhere, wasn't there? Somebody said, "So fantastical as to be believed," something around that kind of, it's almost too good to be true. What was the quote?
I can find the quote. And this is from the Attorney General in 1917. The prosecutor says, "It's a fantasy, a story so strange that it seems hardly to relate to the world of reality."
Yeah.
Well, hey, yeah, right.
So why did he believe it?
So why did you prosecute?
Exactly. He didn't believe it. He thought he could get away with it, I suspect. He thought he could get away with it, and he thought it would be very good for his career prospects. I think that's what was going on. That's my personal opinion, by the way.
So that's why it's such a good quote.
It is. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Wasn't there some quote in the trial as well about the education of women? I think
big time, because the tragedy is, and this is where things out of context can be very seriously distorted. So during December 1916, which was a real turning point politically and also in the nature of how the war was going to be continued or not.
Why was that? Sorry.
Why was it so important?
Particularly around that time, December 1916.
Because things were going very badly during the war, and so there was an argument about the prime minister and a coup, basically a prime ministerial coup, and so there was the removal of Asquith as the prime minister and the replacement with Lloyd George during early December. And so they then formed a very small war cabinet, so much tighter control. A lot of the measures to reduce, to increase censorship, reduce what you could discuss and talk about, and the interception of correspondence and all of that was much, much tighter. And that also meant that the idea of having a negotiated peace reduced hugely. And so the forces that were keen for fighting to the bitter end throw all of the men at this terrible war like a great maw to take all of the soldiers, was getting the upper hand. And so that was what December 1916 was really about. And so Winnie wrote to her sister, Hetty, and also their friends were missing, and her brother was on the run because he'd already gloomy time. And Winnie wrote at the absolute pit of her despair and misery about the way the world looked at that time. And so she used very strong language, and she swore. She used, terrible words, if you can cope, like bloody and damn, and she also used, words that opposing politicians, you know, and like, you know, bugger. And,
not acceptable for women of those times.
That's right. And so this letter was actually intercepted and then produced in court and represented as like the typical way that they spoke and used the language. So they actually got, it was an absurd thing, really.
So it was out of context.
It was
it was extraordinary language used in a desperate situation
between two sisters,
and then taken out of context.
Between two sisters.
Between two sisters, which is private, absolutely, yeah.
And then produced in, and then listened into, these are the sort of people that are allowed to be school teachers. So then why have we now got elementary school, why have we got women becoming elementary school teachers? I mean, and in fact,
just ridiculous extensions of that particular situation, like extrapolating that therefore women shouldn't be teachers. I mean,
women themselves shouldn't be educated.
And women shouldn't be allowed
there
to
a quote? Did you say? Was you about to go on to say the judge said if this is what educating women does, then it should never have been allowed, or something to that?
Well, later, I mean, he actually was taken up by so much about these letters that he personally wrote articles after the trial about the women as elementary school teachers, because this had affected him so greatly.
Wow.
And then the National Union of Teachers then responded to him, and he responded again. So, I mean, it was an absurd situation that went on, and it was a man who was obviously quite cut off from the reality. A certain type of reality, a different reality.
He didn't like the changes that were coming about. He was a man that wanted to remain in control, and that men would remain in control of all situations. Maybe
you really would wonder, and also, I mean, people not understanding the misery. Also, you see the domestic front, which Jeremy Paxman picked up very well on BBC television during the centenary of the First World War. That often the loyalty and patriotism stuff overrides the notion of the misery of the lived experience on the home front, which the women were experiencing big time with food rationing, restrictions on housing, the misery of the anxiety of the missing men, the damaged men, the deranged men that come home.
And the bomb raids themselves
as well, all of that.
Children.
And so that's why I think all these letters is actually really important to get that out and to put the whole lot. Because when you see the other letters, which were also being intercepted, there was no swear words in them at all, right? So, I mean, she actually said, when stress, I swear. Well, who doesn't hit their foot against the table? And,
I certainly do.
And also, I think also then, of course, that not only did they use swear words, but they used words that were blasphemy. And I think that blasphemy was a sort of higher order of offensive language, which is really, anyway, so that was, so, I mean, there were absurd notions in the trial. So the reference to Alice Wheeldon having a snakeskin bracelet, and the inference by the main prosecution witness that somehow that it was a poisonous snakes, you know.
Oh my goodness!
I missed that.
I hadn't read that. That's amazing.
It was actually in the transcript of the trial, and so she and Alice, you know, who lived, you know, knew about Dovedale and all the local peaks, and you know where the local snakes lived and all of that. So she'd been not realising the nasty innuendo in that question. Says, "Oh no, those aren't poisonous snakes." I just found that, you know, really ghastly, the fact that it was being used to infer
any
sinister thing.
But also, in a way,
snakes and poison.
Didn't it show that they had so little to go on, that they were snatching at kind of any tiny potential connection they could make that didn't actually exist?
Well, there's lots of inference. Yeah, they made huge numbers of inferences like that, which were denigrating to women and notions of poison and evil.
Desperately trying to make connections where they're necessarily
and also
weren't.
you see they sent the letters in what was called by the prosecution in this roundabout way, and basically they were really trying to protect their Will, who was a conscientious objector, because they didn't want him caught, you see, because there were lots of people who were basically on the run who'd understood the idiocy of the war and the pointlessness of getting you know, injured and damaged and blinded,
or ultimately killed for
pointless reasons. And also understanding that the German men in exactly the same situation. So it was a crazy world.
Just going to interrupt here to say we have 5 people watching. If you're new to this, there is a chat window. We would love to have some questions from you relating to anything that we're talking about or anything to do with Framed, the Alice Wheeldon story. Maybe you've seen some of our Page to Stage blogs, so you've seen our journey in creating this work. We're here with Alice's great-granddaughter, Chloë Mason, so the font of knowledge. So please ask away in the chat window somewhere on your screen. Send us a little message and we'll answer it for you. I'm interested in talking to you guys now about, like, what's the particular kind of, what's the core for you in this story? What's been your interest through writing? I mean, the way one of the questions we've had quite a lot at the previews is just how do you do it? How do you just take this and make this into a thing? And I think early on we each kind of found a thread that really interested us. Subject, I had some kind of specific details about some of the characters, and I think we all kind of individually had our process, yeah. And but our facet, our angle that we really were interested in, as well as the whole thing. But there was sort of nuggets, weren't there, that we were all interested in. What was your kind of?
Well, I think all of us spent our own time and had our own process in kind of grounding ourselves in the subject and trying to better understand that, be it via meeting or discussing things with historian Nick Hiley, or by hooking up with Derby People's History Group, or by contacting Chloë. I mean, we each took on roles in that way, and we were simultaneously reading a lot. I mean, I love doing research projects. I'm not a big reader in my spare time, but when I get stuck into a project like this, I'm really happy reading, and I really feel the value of having all of that knowledge. And so you grow as a person and you educate yourself, which is fantastic. But then the process of kind of splitting up the information and those down, and we kind of each were drawn, I think, towards different sections of the story, and we kind of went, oh well, I'll take on.
Well, for you it was Dora. I mean, but
there were many things. Yeah,
that was like my standout that I felt you really were like. I'm into this thing, and I'm going to read about this thing. And
well, strangely, I went on a sailing holiday in the Norfolk Broads, which is like tranquil, gorgeous environment, very much back to nature and all the rest of it. And I'm there reading, what's his name, Adam Hochschild's To End All Wars. It's like I got my head in a book while there's all this gorgeous nature. But it was, I couldn't put it down. It was, I kept reading bits out to my husband. It's like, oh my God, can you believe it was this, blah 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 blah. And so we'd have great debates and great discussions about it. And I loved all of that, and I came back from that holiday just with so much ammunition to write that, ironically, to write that song. And it's quite a powerful song. It's driving, and it's quite intense, and there's a lot of information in it, because realizing how on earth necessary for the people in charge to take somebody like Alice and her family and victimize them, and why, what context is required in the country for everybody to just go along with that and go, they're bound to be guilty of that, because there was this political situation and this horrendous war going on. And as you said, describing the emotions of the time and the personal letters, everybody was in a desperate situation and probably not seeing things rationally and able to discount and disbelieve things. So
I think as well it gives the kind of the wider context of what was happening in Europe and across the Russian Revolution and Victorian imperialism and that kind of thing. And it took that particular song is very factually dense, because I think it's packaged in this kind of groovy driving rhythm with one of Sarah Matthews' kind of typical earworm sort of tune. So it's a sticky one, it sticks in your head quite a lot.
Come out wrong or to be lost, and it was very, very important to us. We spoke quite carefully with the sound engineer on Saturday about the lyrics are king. They have to come across first and foremost, and the music follows closely behind. But
what would you say has been your sort of thread that you followed with a particular interest?
Well, I mean, there's two different things I would say. Firstly, in terms of the structure, I probably had the most experience out of the three of us of writing themed shows of that type. Sarah
definitely.
Sarah has also done some, but not
like this.
On her own or in this way that we've written. And I therefore I am the sort of person who throws myself into projects where I don't know what they're going to be, and it's terrifying, but I've learned to not worry about it. So I don't feel you have to start at the beginning and work to the end. I don't feel you have to start at the end and work backwards, you know. So I hope I help the process, and then will the detail in between. For me, the interesting things were the pacifist side, coming from a family that has Quakers in it myself. I had, in a very simplistic, innocent kind of way, assumed that most conscientious objectors were pacifists in the sense of religious pacifists. And I had lost sight of the fact that there were any other type of conscientious objector. So reading particularly the Hochschild book, that was interesting. There were certain facts that came out about the Pankhursts, which I found very, very interesting.
Surprising.
Let's just say, without going into detail and offending some of you out there, I love Sylvia. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
If you want to look up about the rest of them, and I'll happily have a conversation with you anytime, and let's just say I'm not so enamoured as I was, because I didn't know some things happened. So that's what reading can do for you, you know, because history presents you with a one-faceted version of someone, and you start reading deeper and you say, oh my God, these individuals aren't who I thought they were at all. So that was what I loved about it. And then too, and which is why probably I love folk music, is the personal story. The most interesting thing for me about this is a living story. This and it feels as relevant now in today's political climate, with the things that are going on and the manipulations that are happening, as it did in the time it was happening. So for me, that's where I kind of come from in terms of how I relate to this and how I wanted that to be part of how we told the story, and brought it back all the time to Alice and Alice's message of hope. Even though in some ways we got that message in right at the beginning, didn't we? That was one of the first things that came with Mel's tune and your lyrics for that particular thing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, going back to what Jo was saying about crafting the whole show, I haven't written or been part of writing the whole show. I've been part of Show to Life, but it's material that's been written by somebody else, or it's a vast body of traditional material, and I'm really comfortable with all of that. But this, I think, is the first time that I have been part of writing an entire show from scratch that has to tell a story well, and that's been such an interesting process. And I really valued Jo's input and that kind of feeling of let's just be drawn towards a song and go with it and write that, and then at a certain point take a step back, look at the entirety. And I blogged a little bit about this in a vlog that's going to go online probably in the next week, which is literally about this project and how it's affected me as a songwriter, and how I feel comfortable in actually saying that now, and I didn't before. So in a sense, that's what Alice and your family has given me, and how I've grown through it. But after a time when you're assessing the whole project and looking at it, going, okay, so we don't have that piece of information in there. We need a song that says that. And also musically, this is a major piece. This has got this feel, blah, blah, blah. This would be nice in the Dorian mode, you know, and looking at kind of depth and variety of music and presentation across the board. And you can only do that when you have a certain number of things already written, and you can then assess the whole show. So that was really fascinating. And
but it does mean it has moved in tone and shape and tempo, and that was some of the lovely things that people picked up on Saturday, saying that the colour of the music,
and the emotion,
constantly.
Yeah. So many people have said the music, let alone the story, but the music is so emotive and interesting, beautiful. Just thinking of some of the things that have been kind of said to us.
Memorable. This sense of an earworm. We've got a lot of little tiny things that people will go away humming, and they did have their lyric sheets, and they did jump on the choruses straight away, and I was just delighted with that. I was so very happy that this was the first show, and that it was so participatory for everybody straight away. That was absolutely delightful. Yeah.
It seems like we might be having some connection issues, so I'm sorry if we're jolting, Oh, we have another question. Phil Howard, I think. Late to the party, as I had thought you didn't start till 8 until I saw your Facebook. Okay, so you're here. Have you got a question, Phil? We're about to wrap up, but if you do have a question, shoot it
Jump
across.
in there.
And even if we've answered it, we'll answer it again.
We will.
So I wanted just to say that my thread of interest was the character Alex Gordon, as we know him, but we now know he has several names. He was a con artist, and when we first discovered him on the periphery, you know, he was the baddie of this story. He's the guy that stitches Alice up and creates this poison plot out of a discussion that he'd had with Alice about getting poison to kill dogs to allow conscientious objectors to escape a camp, which on the, you know, sounds quite heroic. But as we got to know Chloë better and Dr. Nicholas Hiley, we discovered that actually this was a very troubled individual who'd had a really poor start in life, had lived in workhouses, had been on the streets, and poverty was really where he was trying to escape from. And he found that crime and robbery and blackmail and things like that, kind of
manipulation of others in all sorts of different ways. That was a theme for him, wasn't it?
Quite a master of reinvention.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
To try and escape the life that was, you know, that he was there for. So he really interested me, and I took it on board to write something. I've never written a song before, and I came up with several drafts, and then I just said, guys, you're gonna have to help me here, because I just can't really make this work. It feels a bit amateur, you know, because it was my first thing.
But can I just interject? Mel does write a lot of melodies, very beautiful melodies, and that part of the song was there, and it had a beautiful kind of waltz theme that went with it, coupled with it. So we had a great base to start from, didn't we?
And Sarah took it away and rewrote it, and then we ended up getting together and doing the final draft between us. And I learned a lot through that process. So thank you so much.
Great.
And then we went on to write about Alice's experience in prison, which was fueled by Nick's own work, his kind of unpublished papers. And that felt like an incredible process to get that song down. So I think for me, that character, I mean, cinematic in my head, you know, I can see a screenplay of this story from his perspective. You know, he for me is like the key character. As amazing as the Wheeldons are and as inspirational, there's a lot of depth to them, but for me he's the real kind of interesting one, because of how he just kind of seemed to create it in some way, and was exploited by the government in order to do that. So I don't know if you feel any kind of similarities there.
I think one of the important facts that I learned in the research was that he was actually paid. I mean, he wrote the papers that my father had, included his own version of the story. He writes about being paid on a bonus. And so, because he was working as a journalist when he was hired, and he was hired as a journalist, not as an undercover agent. And he was told that if the more exciting stories he wrote, the better, and he would be paid on a bonus. And if he could do a scoop, you know, yay. Well, I mean, isn't this a scoop story?
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
Hey,
It's not really encouraging truthfulness and integrity with that kind of way of working, really, is it?
Particularly with
But
somebody
if you're money orientated and you're essentially poor, then
I didn't mean that from his perspective. I mean, you know, the government, MI5, whatever the agent was at the time.
I mean that has happened and still happens.
Absolutely. I'm not blind to that. Yeah. It's
So
just interesting
people
to
are paid to
read
produce
about
results, and it's still the case now.
Absolutely. I think that kind of brings it to the kind of current point of the way we're trying to kind of, one of our lines is that this is a 100-year-old story that has a lot of context in today's modern political world. And there's also a lot of joy and interest in, I don't know, come and see it and make your own mind up. But hopefully you've kind of heard enough from us this evening, and you know, questions can continue on the comments in the thread below this. We have a series of Page to Stage blogs, so if you're interested in how we've actually created this and how we've kind of worked with Chloë and Nick over the last 12 months, you can go and watch those. Keep up to date with us on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those places. Our website, moiraitrio.co.uk. You can find out where we've got gigs, and you can also find out the details if you want to book this show as well. Contact Joe at Hair Music. That email address I'll put beneath this video. and also our Kickstarter, which is tantalizingly close to breaking over our goal. There are links below. Go and have a little look at everything, and we hope to see you at a show soon.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your interest in the project.
Thank you so much to Chloë. Bye. Takes a little sec to end.